Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amarant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Meringer Family Foundation, and these friends. Oh, Crystal Apple, are you shiny? Are you dull? Or are you going to remain a little up in the air? What's really happening in the condo market in New York City? You read the newspapers, they have one perception. You speak to developers, they have another perception. You speak to the public, they have a third perception. So today, with the help of my executive producer, Mr. Kligerman, we've put together this group of individuals who are developers, owners, operators, people who are really involved with the condo market. My guests include Michael Ridloff, who is the Director of Investments and Acquisitions for Vanke, Ken Horn, who is President of Alchemy Properties, Matt Barron, who's the President at Simon Barron, and last but not least, Mr. Kligerman, who is the President of Halstead Development Corporation. So why did you put these group of people together?
They're all first in class in the development world, both from the development side and the debt and equity side, as well as having a diverse portfolio of different products. So I thought that it would be a great idea to have different opinions on different marketplaces, because there is no one single market in New York City.
So let's talk about that. The city is based on location, location, location. Where is the best opportunities today where units are being sold? Is it the Upper West Side?
Yeah, look, I think, the way we see it, and I think Ken was talking about this earlier, every neighborhood in New York City has its own different story. We've got projects on the Upper West and Upper East Side. Those tend to be, depending on where you are in those markets, supply-constrained markets, because it's tough to build. You have landmarks issues, you have rent-stabilized tenants that you can't vacate, and you have sort of what I like to call a captive audience of people that want to live and buy there. If you have the right project and it's well thought out, those projects can do very well. I think certain other areas in the city that are, let's call it, maybe a bit more commoditized or are not really focused on end users, focused on investors or people coming from abroad, I think those projects, probably are a bit overdone and are certainly going to have and continue to have challenges.
Michael, you have developments right now in Brooklyn and Manhattan, correct?
And Long Island City.
And Long Island City.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what's happening in those three different markets.
Yeah, Brooklyn and Long Island City have been very, very strong for us. We have over 1,000 units in Brooklyn, Long Island City. Velocity has been great, particularly recently. Look, the market cycles, the fall I think was slow for a lot of people. The new year has been very strong, and I think that if you can deliver a product that people want at a price point that works for them, and thankfully for those projects that we have in those markets, the price point that works for the buyer is the price point that works for us. You're getting a lot of offers and you're signing deals if you're a receptive developer.
And this is something for the expert over here, you know, the king of marketing. Do you have to have a finished product to show today, or can you sell from plans?
Well, you can't just sell from plans. You can sell from a very well-appointed sales office that truly represents the product that you will be selling. But most buyers today are also wanting to visit the site. They want to see the view. They want to see the project is moving along. So 5 or 6 years ago, we would start sales 24 to even as far as 36 months out. Now you're starting sales 12 months out, maybe 18 months, depending on how many units you have to sell. But you're not selling like it was post 2008 out of the trunk of your car with a set of floor plans.
Right. But I think also it depends.
Which you have done.
Done. Right. But
I
think it also depends what type of unit you're talking about.
Correct.
I think especially when you're dealing with sort of the higher priced, higher dollar units, those tend to absorb a little more slowly. It's a much larger investment. I think those people really want to touch and feel. I know the example you're talking about. Those were generally, smaller, I think, lower priced units, and those maybe, might act different.
But even if you're selling on plans, they're coming back to, doing the construction tours and the hoists and everything, and 3, 4, 5 times, particularly on those larger units as well. So you can get those sales closed before you have a finished product. But yeah, with the sales office and the site tours, it's a lot of.
It's also a lot less speculative.
A lot of customer service
today. This is much more buying a home. It's not speculation. Oh, the market's going to go up 25% by the time I close.
Which is an interesting topic. People are buying the homes to live in the home, is what you're saying. A couple of years ago, people were buying the homes with the expectation of either flipping it at a later price.
But I'm not sure that's so true. Yeah. I mean, look, Steve and I have been out this probably 30 years, right? A long time, right? So I've done 35 buildings. The markets change, the cycles change, but what doesn't change is the concept of something that's supply constrained. That's very consistent. So as Matt was saying, if you develop in areas where there's not much development, like the Upper West Side, like we are building at 250 West 81st Street, people say, gee, what an anomaly. 2019, you sold the building out in 12 months, you raised prices 6 times. The anomaly was that there was no new development in that area. There were a lot of rehabs between 72nd and 96th Street, not a lot of new type product. So when the media gets their hands on the condo market and they look at it in an overall basis, there are pockets that are getting devastated. A lot of developers came in who may have been novice developers, whose eyes were a lot larger than they should have been, and desires were larger than they should have been, and they may have put up very large buildings in areas that not necessarily were grade A neighborhoods.
I mean, Lower Manhattan has a substantial number of too many developments over there, which aren't being absorbed that quickly. Too much in the area. As you brought out, which is a definite fact, the Upper West Side, there's a demand. There's people want to live in the Upper West Side, and there's so few units over there. That's why you've been able to achieve such success on West 81st.
Which is why we're doing another project up there as well, at 378 West End. It was the concept of looking to buy selectively and looking to develop selectively, and the folks who've been doing this for a while, I think, understand that. So the challenge, of course, and it's more for Steve probably than anyone, is you have a buyer who comes in and reads in the newspaper that the market is down 25%, 20%, perhaps some places, and they'll come into a sales office and they'll come up with an offer that's 15 or 20% below what the asking is. But if people really understand their product and if their brokers guide them accordingly, that's not happening. So, but as Michael alluded to, of course people do come back 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, but eventually, especially in 2020, they're really pulling the trigger.
When you're talking about 86th Street and 5th Avenue, that's a certain consumer. On the West Side, we're talking a different consumer. In downtown Brooklyn and Long Island City, we're a different consumer. Where are the prices today in Long Island City?
In Long Island City, you're seeing prices anywhere from approximately $1 million to about $2.5 million. And that price point, and that's basically the same price point that you see in the majority of the Brooklyn projects as well. Those price points are performing very, very well.
And what is that per square foot?
Anywhere from, I'd say, 1350 to 1600 on average, and then there are obviously there's penthouses that exceed that, but in general it's about 1350 to about 1600.
But you know what? That whole concept of price per square foot irks me. It irks me. And I'll tell you why it irks me. And Matt could probably, and Steve could play the same thing. Someone goes into your sales office and you're asking $4 million for an apartment. They may calculate what that is on a price per square foot basis, but people are buying based on what the price is and what they could buy it for.
That's right.
And what the layout is also.
And what the layout is. Of course, they want to buy a home, but no one is coming in saying, gee, you're asking $3,000 a foot, I'll buy it for $2,950.
Right.
They may negotiate on a price.
That's right.
And they may look on Street Easy and all the other sources that are out there,
Right.
but people are buying based on the expectation of living there and the expectation of what it's going to cost for them to live there.
Yeah, and I think to Ken's point, I mean, I think those buyers are people that are buying their home. I think if it's an investor that's coming in from overseas, yeah, maybe they're looking at per foots and looking at things a little bit differently. But when you're buying your home, typically what we've seen is somebody has a budget, a price point that they can afford. They need a certain amount of bedrooms, a certain amount of bathrooms. They want to be in a certain area, and that's their box that they got to fill.
Right. I mean, the buyer that walks in with a spreadsheet calculating per square foot is the first person you say, put the spreadsheet down, because they're both say they're 1,000 square feet, but one has 250 square feet of hallways and the other one has 50 square feet of hallways. It's a completely different apartment.
That's right.
And that's one of the reasons I believe that 250 did as well as it did, other than the fact that you built a beautiful product, is your floor plans were really good.
Right.
And people appreciated that.
Yeah.
If you had to give a profile of the buyers that you've been dealing with in different communities, what would the age profile be, the occupation profile of the individual, and the price profile based on different areas? Like the Upper West Side, you said you were able to get 6 price increases.
We have.
Okay?
Are the 2 projects that we have in active sales right now, one's in the Upper East, one's on the Upper West Side. Most of our units fall within sort of the 2 to, let's call it $6-7 million range. And as you go sort of lower than that $6 million, that's kind of where the strength we've seen in the market to be, sort of that $2, $3, $4, $5 million price range. And because we're in those markets where people are looking for their home, they want to stay in that neighborhood. A lot of the people on the Upper West Side in our project have come from the Upper West Side. They're not coming from Chelsea. They're not coming from Brooklyn. Same thing on the Upper East Side. People are coming from a few blocks away, and they want to stay in that neighborhood because their parents grew up there, their kids go to school there. You know, the age demographics, I think, run a little bit of the spectrum, but for the most part, we're seeing people that want to be in those communities.
Michael, what are you seeing in your...
Yeah, and so downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, it's singles, couples, younger families, you know, kids under 5. We have a project in Brooklyn Heights. We have debt positions on projects in Lower Manhattan and Upper West Side, Columbia, Morningside Heights area. Those are the 1.5 and up, as opposed to the 1 to 2.5, and those are, you know, more established families and empty nesters, where the price point's higher and they've had the chance to earn their way into affording that.
Since you have a small conversion of a limited landmark building called the Woolworth Building, what are your prices?
So what has surprised us about that building, we have 5 buyers who bought full floors. Now, what we did is the majority of the building is the tower portion. We had a 2,500 square foot 2-bedroom and a 3,500 square foot 3-bedroom, large units. But the concept of doing Woolworth was a lot different than anything else we ever did, because it's a spectacular building and we wanted to make it grand. And the concept of theoretically making an affordable 2-bedroom and affordable 3-bedroom based on the layouts that were given to us, because the layout of the floor plates was not something we were going to do. That being said, the amount of people who came in and took that 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom and combined it was extraordinary. We have 1 left in the entire building, 1 floor that could possibly be combined. And we had someone who came today who was interested in doing it.
At what heights are these floors?
Well, remember, our first residential floor is 400 feet up in the air. So in essence, everyone is a penthouse, right? Because you go from 400 up to almost 800. It's a unique building, and the challenge for us, of course, when we did it, were multiple. As you pointed out, it was a landmark building. We couldn't put an exterior hoist on the building. Everything had to go vertical through space that we don't own. When I started the project, I didn't have as much gray hair as I have now. I assure you, and we spent $20 million replacing 3,500 pieces of terracotta. It is an extraordinarily beautiful project, which we're very proud of. And what's also surprised us is the amount of people who bought there with children, right? That we did not necessarily think that that would be an area, but the way certain people looking at it, certain of our buyers have moved from the heart of Tribeca into the Woolworth building because is it Tribeca South? Is it the financial district? Is it City Hall? Who knows? I mean, you could come up with as many names as you want.
Here's a twofold question, and whoever wants to pick it up. The tax law change, has that had an effect, you know, with the limitations on interest and taxes on the SALT for the sales of units?
It has. Absolutely. The tax laws have definitely had a change. I think now, and I think one of the reasons why 2020 has started off so well is because people are finally accustomed to it. They know what it really means to their bottom line. No one really knew last year what it really meant. And it has had an impact. You know, and I think what it's also done is it's actually had an impact on how developers look at amenitizing their buildings to try to keep common charges to a little bit more reasonable number because they know those tax numbers they can't control.
Well, how many new buildings now are having virtual doormen?
Right,
Exactly,
because the
especially
staffing
Brooklyn,
costs kill you.
Some of the smaller buildings are having virtual doormen.
Yeah,
you can't get away with that on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side.
If you have less than 50 units, it's very hard to have a full-time staff. It's very, very difficult. But you know, going back to buyer demographic, two of the projects that Michael and Vanky and I are working on in Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn, a lot of those buyers are being fed from the tremendous amount of rental development that occurred in those areas over the last 10 years. And so you have people who
could feed from your rental buildings to your...
Absolutely. People who did not think about living in Brooklyn went out there, they put a toe or a foot in the water. Oh, they really liked it, and now they're buying. Same thing in Long Island City. And those are two markets, particularly Long Island City, that 95% of the product in Long Island City is rental. So the condo product is still a relatively small amount of the inventory available, for people to buy.
Yeah, look,
but there's been a lot of talk about supply constraints. These are examples where the supply is growing, but you have the placemaking that's really driving the demand because they were places that didn't exist and they've been created adjacent to really nice neighborhoods that have some real charm to them, and then you all of a sudden have this,
for Long Island City, I would say we've been investing in Long Island City for over a decade now, and especially the last 5 to 7 years, as Michael just said, there's been some real placemaking that's happened in Long Island City. So when we first started investing there, over a decade ago, that was a place that you came to because you were looking for a cheap rental, and it was it was like a stop off to your next stopping point. Now people have realized it's a real neighborhood. It's a great neighborhood. It's got tremendous proximity to the city, tremendous transportation options. People actually want to stay there, and people haven't really built the condo product for people
right now in Long Island City, but it'll happen. There's not enough retail. Okay, the limitation on retail.
That's still a challenge.
Okay, that is a challenge for the community.
No question.
Okay, one day it'll be greater.
It's gotten much. It's gotten much better.
It's gotten better, and then a bunch of offices. Bloomingdale's is now there, and so you now have a whole new demographic of office workers.
Still a transition. That neighborhood
who
is
want
still
good
building.
retail during the day, and that'll feed it as well.
Yeah.
Can you say something?
Yeah, you brought up this issue of the SALT deductions. If you really look at the history of condominium sales, we had the 421A, we didn't have the 421A. Everyone said condominium.
I was going to bring up
condominium market's going to be dead because people are not getting the tax abatement. You've got SALT, you've got increased transfer taxes, you've got increased mansion taxes. All that hurts your ability to sell. But New York is New York. There's always going to be limited places to live. It's not an unlimited vertical city, and because of the restrictions to develop, notwithstanding those roadblocks, and frankly, they are roadblocks. When the increase in the transfer tax came out and the mansion tax came up, people said, oh my goodness, the mansion tax on a $10 million unit is going to be what, $400,000? It's a crazy amount of money. But people do adapt. And I think that's what makes the developments in select areas will be successful, notwithstanding those changes.
What about amenitizing today?
Well, Steve pointed something out interesting. First building we did in Brooklyn, we did at 199 State Street, and our sales agent, she literally sold units out of the trunk of a car as we were doing the excavation. So, of course, amenities are going to be different. So the building that we're doing on West End Avenue, we're going to have a swimming pool, we're going to have parking, we're going to have a basketball court, we're going to have a squash court. And one thing we did at 81st Street, which is my partner Joel came up with, which was enormously successful, is a music room. Yeah. Right? And so I went back to the building last week. There's a list on the door for kids coming out of school, 3 to 3:30, apartment to 8A, 3:30 to 4, because children are taking music lessons in the music room.
Yeah. What about co-working space? in
But
any building.
yeah, we're putting co-working space into many of our buildings now. You know, it's more flexible. It also can be used for many different uses. It doesn't just have to be.
It could be more of a general
right,
lounge.
It could be
doesn't
a general lounge.
It doesn't need to look like
exactly.
a WeWork.
Right.
With little pockets of areas where people could have some quiet. We put those quiet pods in some of our buildings.
But Steve pointed something out which I think is important. In certain neighborhoods, you're not going to amenitize your buildings because you want them to be more affordable. If you're doing a 30-unit building in Brooklyn where you have a virtual doorman, what you may have is a children's playroom because that's who you're attracting. You're attracting young families with children. You may have a small gym, but that's it. Right. And the folks who are buying there understand that they're paying a little bit less money for less amenities and less services, but they're living in remarkably nice neighborhoods. So again, you can't generalize. You can't say, do you amenitize, do you not amenitize? It's neighborhood by neighborhood. It's buyer by buyer.
I mean,
And you
So it
can
depends what your
amenitize
unit
without,
mix is too.
Yeah, and you can amenitize without cost, like
Right.
that, like a children's playroom, a gym that doesn't need to be staffed, that doesn't have an
Right.
actual
Right.
operating cost to it. Because people, because of the salt and things like that, look, people at the end of the day look at their monthly number, what they have to spend
Right.
between their mortgage, between their common charges, whether you're buying $1 million unit or a $10 million unit. At some point, everybody's got a budget. And it all factors into that calculation.
What happened to the units that you sold which had the 421A for the 10-year abatement today? Are those people moving from those units and looking to buy, upgrading?
In terms of people reselling in some of the buildings with 421, you know, we don't really track it, to be candid with you. But for instance, the building that I live in, I developed the building that I live in, maybe there have been 15% turnover. But a lot of the people are young people, and as Matt said, they're mobile, right? You may be living there with your 2-year-old and your 4-year-old, and you may have another child. You may need to go from.
But I think an astute owner, if they bought their apartment and they have potential gains in them, and you know, if you're a single, you get a $250,000 exemption from gains. If you're a couple, you get a $500,000 exemption from gains. So if you're coming up against one of those hurdles, and you're looking at then paying, you know, 40% of the balance of that income to the government, you're going to be moving anyway. So I think a lot of the buildings that had the 421As are actually in that cycle where they're halfway through or more through their 421A. So those people are looking to move anyway.
I mean, look, a number of people on the old Lincoln Center, you know, condo conversions, they had 25 years, okay?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And now these people are paying such high taxes. Many of them, they're also baby boomers. They can't afford this. They're trying to downsize themselves.
Sure.
But Mike, you also bring up a very good point. You know, the change of the laws with regard to SALT, with regard to the transfer tax and mansion tax. The other change of the law has to do with converting occupied buildings.
That's huge.
Right? And so the concept now, when you have to convert an occupied building, you need 51%. Period.
That effectively makes it impossible.
Impossible.
Is essentially
Right.
what it is.
Impossible.
Right, so when
Well, that was impossible. They actually introduced and potentially voting on a good eviction law.
Right.
But the fact that you can't take a building now, you can do it, but it's going to be almost impossible, and convert it to condominium or co-op unless you get 51%, that just opens up the ability to develop new, because that type of product is not going to come onto the market in the foreseeable future.
That's a supply constraint
It's
for
a
the entire
supply,
city.
period,
Yeah,
the end.
That's right.
Because let me go to the Upper West Side. How many buildings were converted? Go to the Upper East Side. How many buildings were converted?
Done some of them.
Right? Under a non-eviction plan, you needed 15%.
That's right.
Right? And then your remaining units you sold.
51 makes it is effectively, they have effectively closed the ability to convert buildings to condominiums.
Okay, so here's
that,
the question.
That business is gone.
I have 3 developers, and it's in your DNA to develop. Where is the opportunities to develop today?
We've done well in some of the non-core Manhattan markets. Like, their projects are great. We haven't been able to find land that we thought worked, you know, for us. So we've done well in these growing, in these growing
Ken,
neighborhoods.
where do
and
you
we're able to
see?
do that.
But Michael is right. Every deal stands on its own legs. One can't say, gee, I want to deliver a product in Inwood when product might not be available. And I should point out that in some of those neighborhoods that may be developing neighborhoods, the fact that we have this concept of opportunity zones, sellers believe that their products are worth more than they are now because of the whole concept of developing in opportunity zones. So there are many, many factors. I mean, as I said earlier, we started to buy rental buildings in Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights. I don't believe any of those are conducive for conversion. We're going to really hold them as rental. But you don't exclude a neighborhood. What you do is you exclude deals that don't make sense, and you don't do them.
Right, if the deal is worthwhile, it's going to be worthwhile to do it. Otherwise, you know, it has to pencil out, as they would say. But have you looked at the other boroughs?
Yeah, we're very long Long Island City. We still love Long Island City. We think there's a lot of legs and a lot of room to grow. But you know, as Ken and Michael just said, I think every deal's got to stand on its own. And we're very cautious right now in this market, both because of where valuations are and because of the political landscape. I think this is a time to kind of be careful and look very carefully at individual deals that you're doing, irrespective of the neighborhood.
Yeah. But I do think Queens still has a lot of opportunity in general. Yeah. I think Astoria has tremendous amount of opportunity. We just opened up a project in Astoria called the Rowan. We've sold a third of the units in 2 months at almost Long Island City-like prices. I think Upper Manhattan still has a lot of opportunity. Again, you have to fight against the opportunity zones and the people who think that their properties are worth more than they are. But just in market growth, I think it has tremendous opportunity. Inwood would, if we can get past this rezoning issue. But if you don't get past the issues that and the roadblocks that the city and state are putting up, then you can't do anything.
The concept of developers being bad people is a concept that unfortunately has taken on a lot of headwind, and it's just not a truthful statement. I mean, we build product for people who want to live there, and we're not necessarily malicious or anything along those lines. And you know, the concept is to recognize product that's good to build and good to sell or good to rent. It's challenging.
It's very challenging.
So I think in conclusion, Apple, you're not dull, you're not really shiny, basically a tale of many two cities. Different markets, different products, and different price points. And more people moving in each and every day to New York City. People want to still have ownership. SALT has a limited effect. There's a lot of changes. I'd like to thank Michael, Ken, Matt, Stephen, and I'll see you next week.